Game Boy Advance was one of the best consoles to own if you were a fan of platformers. From Mario to Drill Dozer and Kirby, there were plenty of experiences available for anyone looking for a new side-scroller to jump into. One game that largely went by unnoticed though was Gun Slinger, and the fact that it never made it to the West no doubt contributed to its obscurity, but it's now easily accessible thanks to emulation. It sees you being thrown into the role of Billy, who wields a special type of gun that feeds off something known as gun force. These are essentially orbs that are dropped by the enemies that keep your weapon topped up, and aside from your basic shots, you'll eventually come to wield a range of special attacks, from laser beams to homing missiles and bombs that round out your options when it comes to taking down targets. One of the more enjoyable aspects of the game is the movement itself, and Billy is extremely agile, with you being able to perform a high jump which allows you to float in midair and begin shooting for a small period of time. Once back on the ground, you've got a dive that's perfect for dodging bullets, as well as a slide dash that allows you to duck by enemies or squeeze through small gaps. It all works together to promote constant movement, and as a result the game ends up being really fast paced. A nice inclusion as well though that makes each level in the game a bit more interesting is the inclusion of bounties that see an outlaw being hidden within each stage, and the player has to explore and hunt them down. Add to this the boss fights and hidden collectibles, and what you have is one of the best platformers that you can find on the GBA. American Dragon is based on a cartoon of the same name, and it's something that took me completely by surprise, as it's not a show that I grew up watching, and instead I just came across it by accident whilst looking for new games to try out on the GBA. It sees you assuming the role of Jake, a young kid who's out to stop the plans of an evil clan who've got the complete destruction of New York in their sights. In order to save the day, you've got to make your way through just over 20 levels as you smash through hordes of goblins and beasts that literally break out of the walls as you race to retrieve several artifacts said to have the power to defeat the clan once and for all. It's essentially an action platformer, and you've got various ways to fight back, starting with your basic punches and kicks, but you can also jump onto your skateboard that can be used to quickly clear the screen of enemies as they swarm in from every angle. You've got one last trick up your sleeve though, and that's the ability to transform into a fire-breathing dragon that's beholden to a meter that slowly fills as you land hits. In this form you're a lot more powerful, and as you would guess, it's best saved for when you're overwhelmed. Rounding out the game are the light RPG elements that see you being able to level different aspects of Jake at the end of each stage, through the use of orbs that you can collect, with your progress carrying over into subsequent playthroughs, which you'll need to do to reach the true ending and final boss of the game. So for anyone looking for an easy to pick up and play platformer, American Dragon ends up being a lot of fun to play through, and even if you weren't a fan of the old show, there's enough here to enjoy the game on its own merits. When it comes to shooters on the Game Boy Advance, it received entries in many of the popular series like Gradius and R-Type, but one often overlooked gem is Invader. Like many in the genre, there's not much in terms of plot, and it basically boils down to having to save the solar system from a swarm of enemies hell-bent on domination. Right off the bat, you'll get the choice of two different ships that offer unique fire patterns, but as with most shooters, you'll eventually gain access to various others that give you far more options when it comes to dealing with the ever-increasing amount of enemies on screen. What's so good is how Invader handles this, and it does so by the player having to collect coins that are left behind once you've destroyed a target, with them being able to be used to purchase all sorts of weapons and power-ups from a shop. From widespread shots for crowd control, piercing straight lasers for tough enemies, bouncing plasma balls that ricochet off walls, and my personal favourite, the homing missiles that pack a real punch. This system gives you the freedom to arm your ship in any way you see fit, and opens the game up to approach it with many different playstyles. Now the game's made up of 8 levels, with each of them ending with a boss that naturally gets more challenging to overcome the further you progress. But with various difficulty settings, the game ends up being quite forgiving for those who may not be as proficient at shooters as others. Even though it doesn't really bring anything original to the table in terms of gameplay, Invader is still a pretty solid game that any fan of scrolling shooters will no doubt enjoy. Summon Night 2 is very similar to the first entry, and it's almost more of a reimagining than a sequel. Don't get me wrong, there is a new quest, all new characters, new summon beasts, and all new areas to explore, but the core gameplay is very reminiscent of the first game. You'll be exploring dungeons and various areas from a top-down perspective, and once you run into an enemy encounter, the game pulls away to a side-scrolling view where you've got free control of your character. During the battle, you can switch between 3 weapons that you have equipped and summon something known as a guardian Guardian Beast to cast one of many different spells, but the one part where Summon Night 2 differs from its predecessor is the crafting system. Instead of having a weapon blueprint that requires a certain amount of 4 different materials, you now only need one base material, and once you've crafted the basic weapon, you can then upgrade it accordingly, and this is where most of the fun lies in the game, ever pursuing the most powerful weapons. Now Summon Night 2 also has some of the best looking visuals that you'll ever see on the GBA. It goes without saying the side-scrolling battles look incredible, but Atlas really touched up the exploration segments of the game as well. Gone were the days where you had to explore the same dungeon over and over, and the variety of the areas was truly a great improvement over the original game, and did a great job of keeping things more interesting when compared to the rather repetitive multi-floor dungeons found in the first game. It managed to ramp up the visual scale but maintained the smooth animation and exciting battles that everyone who played the original will know and love, so if you never got around to playing it when it first released, it's well worth giving a shot. The Morning Adventure is possibly one of the rarest games on the GBA, and that's down to the fact that there were only 3,000 copies made at the time of its release. Nowadays it goes for stupid amounts of money on eBay, but is more than accessible thanks to emulation, where you'll find a full English translation and get to experience this often forgotten piece of GBA history. You play as Mananito Boy, named after the chocolate-filled bread rolls that inspired the game, as you wake up like any other morning and have to follow your routine of waking up your brothers, tidying up any mess, and eating as many bread rolls as you can. As you can imagine from the premise alone, it's a really strange but light-hearted platformer that's made up of 5 levels and sees you having to fulfill different objectives. And as with most platformers, you've got a range of enemies to deal with as well, from your single jump to the ability to attack or pick up crates and springs to solve puzzles. It's a pretty straightforward game, and as you would expect, there's a few power-ups thrown in to help mix things up as well. The main one being the bread rolls that give you a turbo and jump boost and make navigating each level all the more easier. But there's no way you could talk about the Morning Adventure without mentioning the visuals. For something that's just essentially a tie-in, there's a clear amount of passion that went into the look and style of the game, with some of the best sprite work you'll find on the Game Boy Advance that's all wonderfully animated and detailed. From the cluttered kitchen and bedrooms to the busy streets, it's definitely a game that's got a look that it can firmly call its own. Even though it's quite linear and there's not much to do once you've made your way through it, the Morning Adventure is still worth giving a playthrough. The first thing that'll come to mind upon playing CT Special Forces is just how similar it is to the likes of Metal Slug. It's clear as day to see that it was a huge influence, and thankfully it doesn't just feel like a blatant rip-off, mainly due to the sheer variety of different gameplay ideas that help it become something it can call its own. Much like the first game, you take up the fight as one of several commandos as you run and gun through just over 20 levels, take down waves of enemies that pop up, and try to stop you dead in your tracks. Of course, you've got a huge range of weapons that are slowly dealt throughout the course of the game, from machine guns to pistols, rocket launchers and grenades that all have a role to play on the battlefield. As I mentioned though, what really helps CT Special Forces excel is the range of different activities in the game that work to mix up the gameplay and make it something truly great. You'll find yourself having to take part in helicopter sections that play out like a shmup, save hostages by having to snipe enemies in first-person segments, and also getting to jump into a tank or jeep for short driving minigames that really add to the overall quality of the experience. One of my favourite aspects though has to be the visuals, and the sprite work on display is really impressive. May that be the variety of enemies to the explosions or various vehicles that all look incredibly detailed on the small screen. What really helps the game come to life though are the wealth of animations that come along with these sprites, bringing a sort of energy to the action that's otherwise lacking in many similar games on the system. Ultimately, CT Special Forces 2 is one of the most underrated side-scrollers you'll find on the GBA. Magi Nation is essentially a remake of one of the more popular RPGs on the Game Boy Color that completely reimagined the journey for the new hardware whilst introducing a few new aspects that make it the best way to experience the adventure. It all revolves around Tony, a young boy who moves to a new town and is quickly thrown into the deep end after coming into the possession of a crystal that has the power to summon what are known as dream creatures. To be fair, it's a lot like Pokemon, and you'll find yourself exploring the vast world that's made up of various towns and dungeons dungeons as you come into contact with a whole range of unique monsters. This is where the combat system comes into play, and it's a turn-based affair that sees you pitting these dream creatures against each other. They've got the usual assortment of different spells and physical attacks, as well as weaknesses and strengths that come from having to choose the right creature for the situation at hand. Luckily, you're able to eventually capture many of the monsters you come across, but there's no Pokeballs here, and instead upon their defeat they drop shards, which can be used to forge what are known as summon rings that allow you to carry up to 10 of them at any given time. With just over 50 of them in the game, there's plenty to hunt down and eventually utilise in your party as you march towards the game's end. As for the improvements, the Game Boy Advance version got a few new monsters as well as updated visuals and a completely new area to explore, which ultimately makes it the perfect version for anyone looking to give Magi Nation a go for the first time. Rare were well known for their close work with Nintendo for many years, and it resulted in some of the finest games their consoles ever received. With the Game Boy Advance, this tradition continued, with the likes of Donkey Kong and Banjo-Kazooie making an appearance, but one of Rare's games that doesn't get the same sort of recognition is Sabre Wulf. It's essentially a reimagining of an old Spectrum game that all focuses around a huge beast known as the Sabre Wulf who's been let free from captivity. This prompts the mayor to call on the services of the man who ensnared the wolf in the first place, and sees you taking on a series of levels, with the game managing to mix in a wealth of different playstyles into one. It all starts out in a sort of hub world that connects all of the various levels together that are presented as any other usual platformer, but where the game stands out is the number of activities you'll find yourself having to undertake. Each level sees you having to retrieve something for various NPCs that requires you to overcome a number of platforming challenges, which all revolve around a range of different creatures that aid your travels, such as the blubber that lets you bounce high off its stomach, or the serpent that acts as a simple floating platform. Once you've reached the treasure though, it's a mad dash back to the start, as the wolf is usually waiting nearby, and this is where all of the mechanics come into full swing as you frantically sprint to safety with the prize in your hand. It ends up being a lot harder than it sounds, but once you're used to the different creatures and their abilities, it becomes a lot easier to navigate and ultimately put the wolf in its rightful place. So for any Rare fans out there who never played this one back when it released all of those years ago, it is still definitely worth going back to and trying it out for yourself. Klonoa has long been known as a rather underrated platformer that began its life all the way back on the PlayStation. However, not many people know that a spin-off for the Game Boy Advance took the franchise into new territory, which took the form of an action RPG and saw Klonoa wanting to become a hero, and in order to do so you've got to collect 4 different star medals scattered throughout the land. Instead of presenting the player with a large overworld to explore, the game is split up into a series of levels known as visions, and in order to progress you've got to clear each one by finding keys to open doors that lead the way. It's not going to be an easy ride though, as occupying each of these spaces is a selection of enemies that stop at nothing to foil your efforts. Like many action RPGs, the combat is in real time and sees you commanding a wide range of attacks and special moves to help you get the job done. You start off with a beam as your main weapon that has 2 different types of shots. These can be used to perform simple combos, but as the game progresses you'll naturally come across different types of abilities that range from throwing bombs to casting special moves such as tornadoes that devastate everything in their path. By defeating enemies and collecting gems, you'll soon find yourself leveling up and increasing one of Klonoa's stats such as defense or attack power, allowing you to create the kind of character that suits your style of play best. When it comes down to it, for Klonoa's first attempt at an RPG, it was a pretty solid effort, and although it can be a bit easy at times, it's still a blast to play through, especially for fans of the series that are looking for something new to give a go. Oriental Blue is an RPG developed by Red Entertainment and Hudson Soft, which is heavily based on Asian mythology and sees you taking on the role of one of 2 characters who each have their own separate stories to tell. It's a pretty standard JRPG on the surface, with its overworld, turn-based combat, towns, dungeons and inns. However, the story can change depending on what you do. Going to certain areas, talking to certain people, and winning or losing major battles can alter future events. There aren't multiple endings, but the way you reach that point it is pretty much up to the player, and this is where Oriental Blue comes into its own. The sense of freedom that you're given to explore the world is a truly unique aspect of the game, and helps promote subsequent playthroughs once you've beaten it in order to see everything that it has to offer. Of course, this all sounds great, but without a solid battle system to back it up, it wouldn't mean jack. Thankfully, Oriental Blue doesn't hold back in this department as well, with each encounter being presented in a turn-based fashion and the player possessing a range of abilities to utilize, such as basic attacks and magic, which are percentage based rather than set to fixed amounts of damage, so the skills that you have at the beginning of the game are just as useful at the end. On top of this, you've also got items known as magic stones, which are found throughout the world, which affect the game in a huge way and are used in conjunction with MP to cast magic, but they also grant the player the power to modify their equipment and skill set in order to increase your proficiency in battle. This system was by far my favourite aspect of the adventure, and it allows you to build your characters as you see fit. Overall, when it comes to RPGs on the Game Boy Advance, Oriental Blue is one game you do not want to pass up. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos that release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Road Rage, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.